did not think about that.
Model. Well, I think this cave feels set the standard pretty high, but I am excited to hopefully rise to meet it. Good morning, ladies. I am so glad that y'all are here with me this morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. I'm not a morning person, and I was much more alive than that, so come on, good morning. Thank you very much. So I am definitely someone, I don't want to stand up here and preach at you. I'm not a preacher, okay? I'm not a man. I want this to be interactive, so there's going to be times in which there's questions. Feel free to give out an answer, even if it's a rhetorical question. Totally your call. If you want to do it, more power to you. So we're going to be in 2 Corinthians today, specifically in chapter 1, and we're going to be focusing in on verse 12. Now our theme for this day is going to be Keep It Simple, Sister, as was introduced earlier. And you know what's really interesting, whenever I look at the world today through social media and things of that nature, I kind of see two main categories. There's a group of people who want the thrills, they want the extravagance, the glamour, all those kinds of things. And so we also have a swing to the opposite. There's people who want to focus on the simple things in life. They want to try to boil it down to its core nature. Have you all noticed that split as well? I'm perfectly fine to stand up here and stare at you. I get that from my father.
2 Corinthians what?
Chapter 1, verse 12.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
I just read that back.
So we have this split. We have this extravagance and everything, and we have simple. But what does that mean? When you think of the word simple, what comes to mind?
Easy.
Basic, easy. There's something else?
Dingy somebody.
Dingy somebody, yes. Anything else?
Ordinary.
Ordinary, yes. Anything else? So what was really interesting, I wanted to know what this meant. So I looked up the definition in Merriam-Webster Dictionary. Now, caveat, I did use the website and not the actual book, but the principle is the same. I looked up the definition, and there's a wide range of definitions for the word simple. We get free of guilt and vanity, unintelligent, modest, free from complications, and so many more. So when we see this theme of keep it simple, sister, what in the world does it mean? Well, 2 Corinthians 1:12 is where we're going to get it. So let's read. For our boast is this, the testimony of our conscience, that we have behaved in this world with simplicity and godly sincerity, not by earthly wisdom, but by the grace of God, and supremely so toward you. For context, this book is going to be the final writing that Paul gives to the church in Corinth. From chapter 1, verse 1, we know that Timothy is also included in this process, and whenever we see our, that's what that's going to be referring to in the text. From Acts 18, we learned that Paul and Timothy were both very involved in the ministry at Corinth from the beginning, and they would yes, ma'am.
Would you turn the speaker around to you a little bit?
The microphone.
In front of you.
The microphone. Okay, I'll speak.
To you, so we can hear more. Yeah. I'm deaf.
Is that better? We good?
Is it on?
can turn it on.
It is on, yes. Can you hear me okay? Is that better now? Okay, I'll stand closer to the microphone. Do I need to repeat anything for you? We good? I don't mind.
That's
Okay.
fine. You did fine.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just can't hear very good.
You're just fine. There's no point in you being here if you can't hear, so I'm glad you said something. Okay, so context, 2 Corinthians is the final writing that Paul gives to the church at Corinth, and it involves Timothy, as he was also very active in this ministry, which we learn from Acts chapter 18, as well as other verses. And we see here in 1 Corinthians that Paul has had kind of a rocky past with the church at Corinth at times. He had to write this letter to admonish them, so that there were some things happening at that congregation that were not quite going according to plan. And not only that, but in 1 Corinthians 4:17, we see that he sent Timothy to be an example to them of his teaching because they still weren't getting it. We also have several verses in 2 Corinthians that help us see how rocky this relationship was. If we read 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "For I made up my mind not to make another painful visit to you." So even though Paul has been involved in this ministry from the beginning, there's some pain that's involved in that relationship. If we look in chapter 12, verse 11, writes, I've been a fool. You forced me to it, for I ought to have been commended by you. So something is occurring in which Paul says, I deserve commendation specifically from you, and I am not receiving it. And then chapter 12, verse 16, just a couple verses down. But granting that I myself did not burden you, I was crafty, you say, and got the better of you by deceit. So in Paul's mind, the church at Corinth views him as tricky and deceitful. What in the world is going on here? This is someone who has ministered to them, and we know from 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 3 through 4, and chapter 11, verse 4, that Paul still loves them. So the relationship can be saved, but what has caused this rift? Well, Paul is worried about them because false teachers have come to the church at Corinth. It is a pressing issue that they are encountering, and some have been led astray. 2 Corinthians 11, verse 3. These people that came, these false teachers, they portray themselves as apostles. They say, I have this authority, I have this power, and they preached a different gospel than the one that Paul gave them. And they boast about themselves in a way that Paul mockingly calls them super apostles, which we'll talk about later. And he also counters their boasting in chapter 11, verses 21 through 28. So this is the context, historically, that we find 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 12 occurring in. And it really emphasizes the point that the church is fallible. It is made up of fallible people. It is made up of relationships, and all relationships have bumps and twists and turns, and it can make things difficult. Yet despite all of this, Paul and Timothy still managed to behave in the world with simplicity and godly sincerity. And ladies, I am here to tell you that if they can do it throughout everything that they endured and all the hardships that they encountered, we can as well. So please join me as we learn how to keep it simple, sisters. When I first read 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 12, what immediately caught my attention was the word boast. Some versions might translate this as brag. The Greek word here is kakesis. It might bring to mind the idea of being cocky. The two words sound similar, and that's a great way to think about it, because what it means is to take pride in or to be prideful about. Learning this, I immediately felt my toes get stepped on, and I have a feeling I'm not going to be the only one. If we look at our world today, there, especially in the American society, there is a badge of honor that so many people like to wear, and it is called busyness. The more that they can fill up their schedule, the more they can carry on their plate without dropping the load, the tireder they are at the end of a week, then the better they view themselves as. It's rewarded, it's praised by all of society. But that's not what we see Paul and Timothy taking pride in. That's not what they boast about. They boast in simplicity and godly sincerity. Oof. I very much felt my toes get stepped on, because if I am not careful, I allow myself to get caught up in this whirlwind of busyness and my to-do list and making sure I get everything done and looking at and taking care of as much as I possibly can. And it reminded me, I recently got to go visit my family in Tennessee, and my sister was telling me about this lesson that she heard in chapel at Freed Hardeman. The speaker pointed out that there's something we often miss in the story of the Good Samaritan, which was really interesting to me. I mean, I grew up in the church, I grew up hearing this story. What have we been missing? He pointed out that the reason why the Good Samaritan was able to be the Good Samaritan is because he realized that the real service was people. If he had had too much on his schedule, if he had had too much on his plate, would he have stopped to help the man? Possibly, but definitely not as likely. But he knew that the real service to God, the real thing that we should focus on, isn't, are we doing the right things that God lists for us in the Bible? Are we making to every worship service? Are we praying before meals in bed? He knew that the real ministry, the real service was the people. Jesus himself teaches this in Matthew chapter 5, verses 23 through 24, saying that if you realize that there's an issue with your brother, leave your sacrifice at the altar. That was their worship. Leave your worship. Go make things right with your brother. Then come and worship me. That is true service to God. That is the people, the family that God wants. The next phrase that we see in verse 12 is the testimony of our conscience. It's interesting because this literally refers to the proof of our ability to distinguish good from evil. Later in the book, we're going to see Paul explicitly defend his apostleship and teaching, but he starts giving the proof for it here. And what is the proof? Simplicity and godly sincerity. Are we seeing a theme yet? We started this lesson by talking about the different definitions for simplicity and how it's used. But what does it actually mean in this verse? When Paul talks about the idea of simplicity, what he's referring to is integrity, which I thought was really interesting. This is a what you see is what you get type mindset. Whenever we think about Paul, I typically think of a no-nonsense, I'm going to call it like it is, and I'm going to love you through it, but hey, we got some stuff, we're going to work it out, and we're all going to get to heaven together once we iron out these kinks. Agree, disagree? Awesome. Yeah, he definitely has that approach. There are sometimes he calls out people, and I think, ooh, I'm not even the one being called out. But that seems harsh. But it was all in love. And not only does Paul have this personality and this approach, he owns it and he takes pride in it. Now, am I saying that we all have to be that way? No, absolutely not. Because every person is different, and we know that. Some of us might be able to have a similar mindset and mentality to Paul, but some of us, no matter how hard we would try, could never get there. That's just not who we are as a person. So what does this mean? What do we take away from this? Well, for Paul, behaving more brashly is being accurate to what you see is what you get. So, do people get what they see from us? If I were to take a poll, I would assume that everybody here would agree that they wear multiple hats. Things such as wife, mother, sister, friend, cook, chauffeur, so on and so forth. You would say, these are things that describe me, these are the hats I wear, this is a part of my life. But if I were to ask you who you are, how would you answer? Could you answer? Because I think sometimes we don't take enough time to consider that question. And I think women specifically struggle with this concept. We oftentimes define ourselves based off our relationship with others. How many times do you see a mother that struggles with who she is as her kids grow up and leave the house? Or if you have your friends and you work on building that community and then you move away and that friendship changes, what do you do then? Your whole sense of self has just changed. I think if we're honest, we wear these hats because we feel like it's needed. It's what's expected of us as good Christian women to be a good follower of Jesus. It gives us meaning and pride, but the issue is they don't work, they never have, and they never will. Because all of those things change. Kids grow up and they leave the house, friends move away, siblings grow up and they take different paths in life, so on and so forth. To really and truly live with simplicity, you simply have to know who you are. Now you're probably thinking this is easier said than done, and I'm going to disagree. Now you're probably thinking that's the naivety of youth. And I would disagree again, and ask that you give me a chance to defend my stance. Think back to when you were baptized. When you were baptized, you decided, I'm going to put away my old self. I'm going to die. I'm going to change. I'm not going to be that person. Why do we believe that as we get older, that decision gets to go away? Why do we decide we can't make those changes anymore? We can't decide who we're going to be. Okay, I'm a nerd in many ways. Let me explain how this pertains in this moment. I'm an accountant. I know a lot of you are probably like, oh, I'm so sorry. That's okay, my job, not yours. But what that translates to in this moment, I love spreadsheets, okay? The colors, the organizations, the graphs, it's great. My cousin got me a spreadsheet blanket and mug for Christmas, and I loved it. That was fantastic. Let me explain why I'm talking about this. So when I went to college, I decided that this was the perfect opportunity for me to choose who I was going to be, for me to figure out how I'm going to define myself, reinvent myself. But not in the crazy sewing wild oats kind of a thing or anything. I made a spreadsheet. I looked at the people that I admired, and I said, what characteristics about them do I like? What do I not? And I made a big list, and then I color categorized it, and I picked my top 10 or so characteristics, and I said, okay, this is who I'm going to be. And then I purposely planned things in my life to help me develop those types of characteristics. When I graduated college, I did the exact same thing, except there was a little bit more wisdom to my approach this time, because I had learned and grown, so it was time to do it again. If we're honest, we've probably all struggled at some point in our life with our worth and who we are. The world doesn't help us with this. It teaches us that we should spend a lot of our time and energy finding ourselves. Go, experiment, discover what you like, what you dislike. The thing is, as Christians, the finding part of our lives is over. When we found Jesus, the questing and the questioning ended. Now we get to look at God, who he is, how he defines us, and we define ourselves based off of that, so that when people look at us, they see him, and that's what they get. Now, the other part of Paul's and Timothy's pride comes from what they call godly sincerity. To be honest, when I began looking at what this meant, I was a bit confused because there was a word I had never seen before. The literal definition, I'll give it to you and then we can see if people know, the quality or state of being free from dissimulation. Anyone know what that word means? Okay, I'm glad it was not just me. So, I shall explain. Dissimulation, it's the idea of hypocrisy or false pretense. So, if we were to rephrase the definition, we get the state of being free from false pretense. I don't know about y'all, but that sounds pretty good to me. The other idea we see associated with this is purity of motive. So really, it's a similar idea to the simplicity that we were just talking about. There's an emphasis being placed here by these ideas that Paul is using. He's saying the reason him and Timothy are able to have pride is because they are true to who they are in God. It's kind of uplifting and encouraging if we really think about it. Instead of being proud of who I am when I still make mistakes and bad choices, if I'm honest, I'm proud of who God has made me to be. Instead of boasting in my abilities and talents, which come and go on the daily, I get to boast in my God and his power and his might. It takes the spotlight off of us, along with the pressure, and put them both on God where they belong. Paul is a great example of this. In multiple places, we see him laying out his credentials, if you will. Turn with me to Philippians chapter 3. We're going to look at verses 3 through 8. Starting in verse 3, "For we are the circumcision who worship by the Spirit of God and the glory of Christ Jesus, and put no confidence in the flesh, though I myself have reason for confidence in the flesh also. If anyone else thinks he has a reason for confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church, as to righteousness under the law, blameless. But whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ. Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish, in order that I might gain Christ." Paul did not hold on to earthly things. He maintained his occupation as a tent maker whenever he came to Christ, but if you think about it, that's really it. He had no home. He spent the majority of his time traveling to different locations, evangelizing and ministering to people. He gave up his religion, and with that, he gave up his background and his heritage as well, because the two were so interwoven. And with that, odds are he also lost the majority of his family. It had never really hit me just quite how much Paul gave up. But he looks at all of those things, and he says, for Christ, that's all garbage. But those are things that we hold dear. I just bought a house and I'm really excited about it. I've been working on that for a long time. It's been such a cool experience. Chaotic, yes. But it's been a really great experience. And in the process of getting settled and everything, I've been looking forward to and working towards this. Now with this lesson, I have to stop and think. If God called me to mission work, would I be willing to give up this thing that I have worked so long and hard for and follow his call? What about my raising? My family are the most important people to me. If I had to change dramatically from how I was raised and it was going to cost me those relationships, would I be willing to? My sister's getting married in July. What if I couldn't go and be a part of that wedding? My other sister graduates high school. My brother turns 16 this year. So much is going on. What if I have to miss out on celebrating in those moments with them because I want to stay true to God? And it hits so much harder than it ever has before. Anyone else relate to these things? Can you imagine these scenarios? Have you thought through them before? Would you be willing? We hear the phrase, a man buys a house, but it's a woman that makes it the home. If you had to give up your home, the place where you've made your family, where it's comfortable for everybody to come and visit, maybe you have all these memories of raising your children or good family and friend times. If you had to give that up to follow God, could you do it? Would you do it? What about our jobs? One of my favorite movies is Courageous. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but it's essentially about these group of friends, and they are all cops. They're religious. And as they're going along, they meet another man, and his background is different. He works more manual labor jobs, construction, and the like, but he kind of struggles to hold on to his job, and it's made so much harder for him because he's trying to support his wife and his 2 kids at home, and they just are constantly having this rough time. Well, by some happenstance, actually, via God, basically, he ends up in their friend group, and through that, they're able to have their connections, and they help him get a job at a factory, and things start really looking up for the family, and it's going great until he gets called into the manager's office. And there's 2 men in there, and they say, okay, we're considering you for a promotion. We have this higher paying job, it's going to be better hours and everything for you. All we need you to do is lie on this inventory sheet when it comes in, say that we're getting less boxes than we actually are because I have something else I need you to do with them. And so he then has this dilemma. What does he do? And he and his wife have this long, hard conversation about, okay, well, if you lie, we get a better life. We get more stability, we get to see you more, we don't have to worry about as much. But we believe in God, we follow him, we know lying is a sin, and the other thing, the side consequence is, if you don't lie, not only will you not get the promotion, but you might lose the job you have. Are we willing to risk it? But it's a movie, so of course, he decides not to lie, and the men were looking for someone who would be honest. So it all works out in the end. But can you imagine being in that situation, knowing that you have to make this moral call, and if you make the wrong one, it's going to cost your family everything? There are preachers who have had to make this decision. They've had to look their families in the eye, as they know if they teach the whole counsel of God, they're going to lose their income, they're going to lose their house, they're going to lose their church family, they're going to lose everything. I've known of Christian men who have had to leave congregations because the brothers and sisters there decided that they were no longer trustworthy after they reported child abuse that was happening in the congregation. So they lost everything. These are the types of sacrifices that sometimes we are called to make that I can't even communicate how hard that can be mentally and emotionally. And maybe you have experience with some of these things, and if you do, I'm so sorry, because it is not easy. But the thing is, it's not impossible to make these decisions and get through them. It's difficult, completely. I will never disagree with that. But once again, we have the example of Paul. He was so committed to God and the person that God had made them that Paul committed, and he committed fully. Our society today has a very lax view on commitment and what that means and what it looks like in our lives. And if we aren't careful, it can impact us in the church as well. What we have to remember is it's not about us. When people look at us, it's not us they should see. They should see God. They should see his characteristics, his love. That should be what they get from our lives. No, it's not easy, and anyone who ever claimed that is straight up lying. Jesus himself told his followers to expect persecution and hard times in Matthew 5:11-12. But the thing is, Where's the pride in completing something easy? Not saying we shouldn't celebrate moments, those are 100% something that we should, but we can all acknowledge there's something different whenever you experience something that you've been working towards and struggling, and you've been fighting for this, and you finally succeed. There's a level of pride and honor and just a sense of self that comes from that. And if that's true about the physical world, sisters, how much more true is that about the spiritual world? When we come up against these hard spiritual moments and we fight through it and we win, it's going to be amazing. In our time together today, we've looked at the context of 2 Corinthians to kind of gain understanding about what's being talked about and why it's being talked about. We know that Paul had hard times in the church in Corinth, but it didn't stop him from loving them or from teaching them. We began to break down 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 12. We learned that boasting refers to taking pride in something. And while Paul had many things he could have boasted in, what he and Timothy did boast in was living according to who God desired them to be and designed them to be. Simplicity refers to living in a way that lets others see who we truly are, and godly sincerity adds to this in allowing freedom from false pretense. With these ideas, we were able to discuss some practical application for us, such as evaluating how we portray ourselves and God to others, purposefully choosing who we are, and considering what we are able to give up to take pride in these things the same way that Paul does. There's still a lot to discuss though, so stay tuned. I'll give you a sneak peek, and our next lesson we'll talk about the context we discussed and how it gives insight into what Paul's talking about, and we're going to finish out chapter 1, verse 12. Thank you.